Was Jayson Tatum's injury more impactful to the Eastern Conference than the Bucks losing in the first round for a third consecutive season? We debate that and what is the best untold Milwaukee Bucks story. Ponder those thoughts coming up after this on today's Locked On Bucks.
You are Locked On Bucks, your daily Milwaukee Bucks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Welcome into Locked On Bucks. I'm Justin Garcia. You can hear me on the Bucks Radio Network when we're in season, of course, typically joined by Camille Davis, who's battling under the weather today. But shouts to Camille for holding it down last week while, as you may have noticed, I was gone out in Las Vegas, taking in the final run in the residency for Dead & Company out there in Vegas. So shouts to Camille for holding things down and allowing me to do that. We thank all of you for tuning in to Locked On Bucks each and every morning, making this your first listen of the day. All the everydayers out there who have certainly been in the mentions the past couple of days with all the trade chatter starting to heat up. And that's what we intend on getting into in today's episode is some more context on some of the things we've heard kicked around vis-a-vis Giannis and the Bucks. And to be clear, none of this coming from the organization or even sourced reporters around the team. More of the speculation. Everybody's favorite part of the offseason when their team is bounced. Let's just do the same old tired trope of, well, you got to trade this player and let's move on to this. So we've seen quite a few more of those moves proposed for the Bucks and some other teams. I want to get into some of those, some trade proposals that you guys sent over as well. There's one particular that has come up quite a bit involving the Miami Heat. So we'll mull that one over. And I mentioned Untold as well. I don't know if you guys have been keeping up with that Netflix series Untold. They just had the shooting guards one 2 weeks ago on Gilbert Arenas and Javaris Crittenton. They did the Malice in the Palace a couple of years prior to that, and it got me to thinking, what's the best version out there on the Milwaukee Bucks if we did a Bucks-specific version of Untold? So I want to get to that a little bit later in the show, but we start where we have each and every day for these past couple of weeks now, and as I would imagine we will for the foreseeable future, and that is on Giannis watch. So nothing has changed on that front, to be clear. We saw the news come out that Giannis is going to meet with John Horst in a couple of days here. That's your typical end of season meeting that Giannis and just about every player will have with the front office and John Horst specifically. So I think a lot of people had a tendency to see that and think, well, here it comes. Here's where we get the Giannis summit. And the trade is probably asked for, or maybe it's not asked for. I don't think we're going to get any clarity on that this week. I think it's something that's going to stretch well past the playoffs ending. It's not going to come out during the NBA Finals, so it's either going to come out in the next 2 weeks here, or it's going to wait until late June, right, when the Finals ends. So I don't anticipate that answer coming now, but as I mentioned, it's been unavoidable where you just get more and more trade proposals coming up here. And there was one that really, I won't even say struck me, but I think we've all kind of learned to listen to these Giannis trade proposals and kind of roll your eyes on it. And one came up on our friend Bill Simmons' podcast yesterday, today, whenever that is you're listening to this, suggesting, what about trading Giannis for Evan Mobley straight up? And on the surface, I think if it comes to that, it's something that you can work with as a building block. But the notion of that's it, that's the trade straight up, Evan Mobley for Giannis, and even the two of them, Bill Simmons and Ryan Russillo, kind of kicking back and forth of, well, would Milwaukee have to kick anything else in there? There is no scenario where the Bucks are adding anything to a Giannis trade if it in fact comes to that, unless it is more salary for the Bucks to shed. There's no sweeteners that they have to add, and there's no sweeteners they should need to add in any trade with Giannis. Now, I do think, as I said, that's, if it comes down to it, I think you got something there as a starting point, because, and this point was made by the two of them, Camille and I have talked about this quite a bit. Frank has mentioned it as well. It's not as easy as trade Giannis. Again, I have to continue to preface with this. If we come to that, it's not as easy as trade Giannis and just get a ton of draft picks and get a young player back, because the reality is, if you trade Giannis, you will have, in all likelihood, a bottom 10 roster in the league. You don't have your first round pick. You don't control your first round pick. You don't control that until 2031. So it does you no good to essentially tank and to just say, we're going to get future draft picks. And that's the other tough part. That's the catch-22 that I talked about a couple of times. Any deal involving Giannis, if it does in fact come to that, where he says, I don't see it here, I would like to move on. And as we've seen in the comments and a number of shows, we've even seen one come in on today's show as well, as we're live here. I think fans are kind of there with him and say, well, thanks for everything that you've done for the organization. We got a championship from you. We want to do right by you. We're disappointed, but we've accepted that. The best play for the Bucks and for any team in that situation where your star player, still in his prime, has said it's time for me to move on, is to kick the can down the road and to say, okay, if we're going to move you, we would like future assets. In other words, we would like to do the same thing that the New Orleans Pelicans did to us and the Portland Trail Blazers did to us. We will trade you, but we don't want a first-round pick this year from that team you're going to. We don't want a first-round pick 2 years from now from that team you're going to. We would like a first-round pick 5 to 6 years from now. We want that pick, the 2031 pick, the 2032 pick swap, the 2033 pick, or the 2029 and 2031, and pick swaps around those. We want it as far down the road as possible, because we are betting by that point, you're going to be exiting your prime. That team that acquires you, they're not going to be as good. And we want those assets, because sending, and there's nothing to indicate this is what's going to happen. Let's just say Giannis asked for a trade and it's to the San Antonio Spurs. Getting a first-round pick from the Spurs next season, 2 years from now, 3 years from now, when they have Giannis and Victor Wembanyama, the chances are that's not a very good pick. So that's the tough spot the Bucks are in, is you're better off to say, we would like to defer those picks and we want those further down the road. We'd still like some young talent coming back as well. We'll take on the salary to match. It's going to cost you some more picks, but you can't do that because you don't own your picks. You don't control your draft until 2031. So in doing that, you're actively making yourself worse, and in turn, increasing the chances that the Portland Trail Blazers and the New Orleans Pelicans and teams that do control your draft assets, those teams are going to be getting better while you're getting worse. So that's the tough part that the Bucks are in. And I know this is probably old news to a lot of you, and Camille and I have talked about this quite a bit, but the more you hear it, the more you have to explain, look, if it does come to that, I do think it's going to be something like that, where it's a player the caliber of an Evan Mobley and more that's coming to the Bucks. So it's somebody that can keep you competitive in the short term and also get you some other assets to help you out there where you can start the rebuild down the road. This isn't we're trading him for a ton of picks and picks down the road, or even the notion of, well, work out a three-way trade with the Pelicans where you get your picks back. I just have a hard time coming to grips with trading Giannis and what you get in return is the picks that you traded to get Drew Holiday, where it feels like you're kind of starting back at square zero in that sense. So that's, I think, what makes this more complicated than anything else, is the fact that the Bucks do not have those picks for the next couple of years here. And that's what puts them in a more challenging spot, a spot of, if you do trade him, it's more a win now. And again, the Evan Mobley thing came up just because that was something that was suggested on the most recent Bill Simmons podcast of Giannis for Evan Mobley. And that was it. I can guarantee you that is not the trade that the Bucks would make. That if it comes to that, that's the starting point, but it's not. I mean, as good as Evan Mobley is, as talented as he is, there's still questions around him. I don't see any scenario where Evan Mobley is one of the 5 best players in the league at any point in the next decade here. And that's not what you trade Giannis straight up for. So none of this chatter is going to go away. I've seen a lot of comps too with the Denver Nuggets. Some of the comments have already come up here of, why don't we talk about this? What I would just urge you is, let's not get into the comparison game. I think there are a little bit of small differences between the Giannis situation, the Nuggets situation, the Bucks situation. Um, but it is worth pointing out, right, that, hey, there's a team that has started to come up short. And there's a team that's starting to give you vibes of that Bucks team post 2021, where they had this very tough, spirited series against the Oklahoma City Thunder, came up short, took them to 7 games. They quite frankly should not have gone to 7 games. And in many ways, it evoked memories of the Bucks taking the Celtics to 7 games in 2022 in a series that should not have gone to 7 games. It only went 7 because of Giannis. So I get those comparisons. I don't think it's a perfect fit. I don't think it's a like for like. So we'll get into that a little bit later as well. But I do want to take a look back at this Jayson Tatum injury and the growing notion that this is it for the Boston Celtics. So what has actually been more important in terms of swinging the Eastern Conference and the future landscape of the conference? Was it the Bucks coming up short in the first round for a 3rd consecutive season and everybody assuming that means it's the end of Giannis in Milwaukee? Or is it actually Jayson Tatum's injury and what that means for the Boston Celtics? We'll get into that conversation coming up after the break here on Locked On Bucks. Well, shopping for a car should be exciting, not exhausting. Between the confusing prices and hidden fees, it can feel overwhelming. That's why I love using Car Gurus. They help you cut through the noise and show you the best deals with full confidence. With over 4 million listings, Car Gurus has more new and used cars than any other major online marketplace in the U.S. They verify dealers, provide real price analysis, and give you the tools and data you need to make the right choice without second-guessing yourself. If you need a deal you can trust, Car Gurus makes it easy to compare vehicles side by side with unbiased deal ratings. Their best feature is price drop alert, so you know exactly when the perfect car is available for your budget. And plus, the in-depth vehicle details give you peace of mind before stepping onto any lot. It's no wonder similar web estimated traffic data shows Car Gurus is the #1 most visited car shopping site. Buy or sell your next car today with Car Gurus at cargurus.com. Go to cargurus.com to make sure your big deal is the best deal. That's cargurus.com, cargurus.com. Okay, so, and I just want to mention this too. We've had quite a few suggestions for the Bucks to try to acquire Bam Adebayo. And I mean, I don't see the Miami Heat moving on from Bam Adebayo at this point. I don't know if that's the exact fit. I mean, look, I would love to have Bam Adebayo, certainly a talented defensive player, can be an offensive hub, still 27, going to turn 28 next season. But I think what we've seen is you either want to stretch 5 playing alongside Giannis, or you want to lean into Giannis at the 5 and then find a stretch 4, basically, to play next to him. So in that sense, not that it's a bad fit, I just don't think that would be the fit that you're looking for. And also, I don't think, I know we've, apologies, I can't remember who it was that has sent this to both Camille and I a couple of times now. I just don't think the Bucks have the pieces to get a Bam Adebayo when you think about players like Pat Connaughton, Kyle Kuzma that would have to be included for the salary portion. I don't know what that's exactly bringing you back in terms of value, or what their value is perceived, I should say. But it brings us to what I think is really one of the more interesting things, and that's the Jayson Tatum injury. So, you know, you've started to hear more and more talk about the second apron. And is this actually a good thing? Which is funny now in hindsight that, you know, it's the same thing a lot of us were saying at the time of why in the world did 29 of the 30 teams sign off on this when you're basically saying we want parity. You know, we want an even playing field for all of these teams. That I can get even a majority of NBA teams, GMs and league groups signing off on this CBA to say, you know what, this is our chance. And this isn't to throw stones here because they're in the conference finals for a second consecutive season. But a team like the Indiana Pacers, if they were to say, well, this is our chance, you know, let's level out the playing field. This gives us a chance to be uber competitive in the NBA. We'll vote for this. The Cavs, same story. We'll vote for this. The Utah Jazz will vote for this. Sam Presti of the Oklahoma City Thunder was the only GM, and the Thunder were the only team in the league to vote against this CBA because, as Presti said, as a small market team, drafting, developing, paying to keep our guys. That's how we can get superstars. It's much tougher to get them in free agency. Trades, I mean, sure, you can trade for a guy, but it's really the player discretion, and they dictate where they're going to be going. And, think no further than Kawhi Leonard gets traded to the Toronto Raptors, wins them a championship. You could have made a case, hey, you can really build something here and be competitive for years to come. But Kawhi Leonard was, singly focused on, no, I want to go to LA and I'm ready to leave in the offseason even after winning an NBA championship. So to Presty's point, that's the way we got to do it. We got to draft the guy. We got to build him up, develop him, show him how great it is here, and then keep him here. This CBA is making it increasingly difficult for us to do that. Having said that, as I said, a lot of us pointed out at the time, look at this Celtics team. Look at the contracts on this team where, one by one, the money that was doled out, the trade to bring in Drew Holiday and then signing him to the extension that you did, cost of doing business, sure, but you also realize it's a credit card. And eventually that bill is going to come due. Now, you can continue to pay the minimums. That's only going to prolong it. And before you know it, the credit balance, whatever it is shut down, shut off, pushed down, and you don't have the same spending power as you once did. That's what we're seeing with a lot of these contracts and cap space, and that you can keep kicking the can down the road, but eventually you come to the end of the line where you have to make a decision. And this is not just about the luxury tax. And I think that's one of the more underrepresented or misrepresented things about this CBA is you keep hearing this conversation about the tax and the Celtics specifically saying, look at that salary, look at that tax bill that this team is going to be dealing with. At some point with a new ownership group, you're going to say, we don't want to pay that. Phoenix Suns are paying $152 million in luxury tax this season. They didn't make the playoffs. Minnesota Timberwolves have an $85 million tax bill. They may win the championship. Celtics have the third highest tax bill at $53 million. Lakers are fourth at $53 million, just under Boston. They're out of the playoffs right now. The Knicks are at $38 million. The Bucks at the deadline made moves to get down to $27 million when they were third or fourth highest bill coming into the season. So you see all these teams that have started to look at it and say, well, we got to think about doing something here. There's 10 teams that are in the salary or in the luxury tax. The second apron isn't about the luxury tax. And sure, you can factor in things like the repeater tax. And it's easy for me to say, well, just pay it when it's not my money. But the second apron is more about how you build out your team. And that's the big thing to remember with the situation that Boston is in right now, because the odds are Jayson Tatum is not going to play next season. So you're left with $54 million for one season, at least, in dead cap space. Same thing as the Bucks with that Damian Lillard situation. We don't expect him to play next season. $54 million that Damian Lillard is going to be making. But the difference there is Jaylen Brown, his extension kicks in or has kicked in. He's making $53 million. By the way, next year was the first year for that Tatum extension to kick in. So you talk about the opposite of fortuitous timing there. Drew Holiday, I mentioned you trade for him. You sign him to an extension basically because of the cost of doing business. And you knew at the time of that extension, look, this is going to be a tough pill to swallow at the end of that deal, but I don't think you anticipated that pill was going to come to be swallowed a year from now. $32 million for Drew Holiday next season. I don't want to slander Drew Holiday. I think it's been noticeable. You can see a little bit of the decline and more the Drew Holiday that the Bucks had, where you're asking him to do more offensively than he's really equipped to do once Jayson Tatum went down. $30 million to Kristaps Porzingis. Who knows what's going on with Kristaps Porzingis and that illness that he was battling, and if he's going to be the same guy, because Kristaps Porzingis, you got the best possible version of him 2 years ago. That wasn't the case this season, and it certainly wasn't the case in the postseason. Derek White, $28 million. Al Horford's a free agent, but Peyton Pritchard, $7 million. Not a bad contract by any means. $10 million for Sam Hauser. The Celtics have 12 players under contract next season. One of them we don't think is going to play, and their salary is $227 million. It's not even about the tax. The tax level is $187 million. So they're already $40 million over the tax. forget about the tax. It's about how do you round out your roster. And again, you still got at least 2 more guys that you're going to have to sign to fill out that roster. That's where this second apron becomes so punitive, is how do you put yourself on that level? And last year, I know I even said it, the Celtics may be the team that can buck this second apron thing and be that far into the tax and well into the second apron, but still remain competitive because they have this group that fits and because they have this group that can play a lot of games and a lot of two-way players. That the rest of the roster that you're rounding out, it's veteran minimums. That's all you can do when you're a second apron team. It's fine if you've got a healthy Jayson Tatum, healthy Jaylen Brown, Drew Holiday, Derek White, Kristaps Porzingis are all healthy, and you got guys too like Peyton Pritchard emerging, Al Horford healthy, right? And now we're starting to see the cracks there. And the Celtics are not immune to the same things we've talked about with the Bucks. They are in a very precarious spot this offseason because of the same things we talked about with the Bucks last season. How do you fill out this roster when all you've got is minimum contracts to dole out? You can do that. But I think we've had one key learning from this postseason. And Nikola Jokic himself said it after the Denver Nuggets were eliminated from the postseason yesterday. I do want to get into that conversation. We mentioned the Untold too. What story is out there to be told about the Milwaukee Bucks? But why is it even more difficult now for the Celtics than teams like the Bucks a year, 2 years ago to round out your roster with veteran minimum contracts? We'll get into that discussion and tell you why it's especially challenging for Boston coming up next on Locked On Bucks. When I found out Skims was making underwear for men, I was intrigued. I've heard so much about their quality from friends and family, so I had to give it a try. And let me tell you, it lives up to the hype. I have always had issues with underwear. I'm sure you all have as well. Finding the right style, fit, comfort. Skims changes all of that. Their men's line offers something for everyone, from boxer briefs to classic briefs, all designed with the perfect balance of comfort and style. I tried the boxer brief from Skims and I'm hooked. These are perfect for an active lifestyle. They move with you, never lose their shape, and stay in place all day. Whether you're working out or running errands, they're the most comfortable and reliable underwear you will ever wear. Plus, the lightweight material feels amazing, almost like you're wearing nothing at all. So shop Skims Men's at skims.com/lockedonnba and Skims stores. Let them know we sent you and place your order. Select podcast in the survey and select our show in the drop-down menu that follows. Skims is the official underwear partner of the NBA, WNBA, and USA Basketball. So what makes it so difficult is, if there is one learning that we've had here, and why, again, I've maintained this stance all along. I'm not going to argue the Bucks are in a great spot in terms of their cap, roster situation, any of that, the looming uncertainty over Giannis as well. I'm not trying to say, hey, the Bucks are in a really good spot here. But I think what we've learned is, the era of the super team died, not just with this CBA, but a couple of years ago. When you look at how teams forged together, the teams that found success and the teams that are starting to build something now, you can't find sustained, prolonged success deep into the playoffs with a super team, with 2 superstars and just a cast of players. You need depth, which is one of the funnier things, because I know I myself have talked about this. We've all had the conversation about, don't get too hung up on depth. Once you get to the playoffs, you need 8 guys that you can play and 7 that you trust. The old 82 versus 16 conversation. Depth is great for the regular season. That's how you get the 1 seed. That's how you win 60 games like the Bucks did in 2018. It's how you do what the Bucks did the year prior, or the year after that, I should say, when they were on pace at one point to win 73 games. It's quite frankly how teams like the Cavs pulverized opposition this season. But yeah, once you get to the playoffs, depth isn't quite as important. And I think what we've slowly started to see is that may not be the case anymore. That when you think about the teams that are best positioned now, they are not superstar-driven teams. They are teams that are deep, that are playoff deep. Again, 8 guys at least that you can play in the playoffs, and at least 7 of them that you really trust. Even if it's just one superstar and a couple of really good players around him. In the case of the Indiana Pacers, I mean, Maybe Tyrese Halliburton's a superstar. I don't know if I'd classify him as that, but that's a team you look at and say, I don't see a superstar, but I see a lot of really good players that fit together. And that's, I think, where the league has shifted. It is far more important to have playable players and very few weaknesses. And that, from day one in this postseason, was the thing that struck me the most about the Indiana Pacers. Why I said they're going to win the Eastern Conference. They have so many different guys they can put out there that they trust, and their weaknesses are not as noticeable as you see with other teams. Similar to the Knicks as well, right? Similar to the Boston Celtics. One by one, Minnesota Timberwolves, same story there. Oklahoma City Thunder, same story there. The teams that are finding success are the teams that have playoff depth, not teams that have star after star after star. And that's the spots, if all stays as currently is, that's the spot the Bucks are going to be in, hopefully, next season, because Dame's not going to play. We think, I should preface with that, right? I don't want to count Damian Lillard out, but the numbers are not on your side. History is not on your side. And for Jayson Tatum as well to come back from this. So you got Giannis. And this is the opportunity, I suppose, to say, Marcus Johnson has made this point. I know Jim Ozarski and others have made the point too. Look, one of the big selling points for Giannis here in this offseason is, hey, the way we play those final 8 games, especially when the Bucks won 8 in a row to go into the postseason, but really from mid-March on, when Damian Lillard was dealing with the deep vein thrombosis, that way we played, that's the way we're going to play. You're basically Nikola Jokic. You're the point center for us. And we're going to surround you with shooters. We're going to surround you with more two-way players. We're going to try to get younger here. And we've seen John Horst be very, very creative in his moves in the offseason. Again, none of us thought the Bucks had what was needed to get Drew Holiday. None of us thought they had the necessary pieces to get Damian Lillard. So John Horst has pulled off some moves. He's going to have to be just as creative, if not more, in this offseason to continue to tweak there. You certainly have some big decisions to be made for a number of guys. And again, this all comes back to Giannis. What does he do with Bobby Portis, with Kevin Porter Jr., with Gary Trent Jr.? And then Giannis's decision, what does that mean for the rest of the NBA? I do wonder if we are approaching an era in the NBA where we don't see those type of, I won't say blockbuster, but those types of moves made anymore, those trades. I think Giannis is immune to that. If you can get a player and he signs off and wants to play for you, one of the 3 best players in the league, one of the 75 best players in the history of the game, still in his prime, you do it. But the other moves, right? The moves like the Bucks acquiring a Drew Holiday. I wonder how many more of those types of moves that we see go forward because of the importance of keeping your guys, drafting, developing, keeping controllable contracts, and not giving up those assets. I do think we've reached an era now where draft picks are going to be more important than ever. Not for trades, not for let's stockpile second-round picks so we can toss those in. To get more bites at the apple, as everybody, certainly Brewers fans, love to hear. Draft picks are going to be important, and that's the tough spot that the Bucks are in because this is the way to build your team. Similar to the conversation that's had every year in the NFL about how's the best way to find success. Get a rookie scale deal, a quarterback on a rookie scale contract that hits it big. That's competitive, that keeps you in games, that wins games for you. You can fill out the roster around them. That's the number one advantage to have. I think what we're seeing is get a star, get a guy that you've developed, and then continue to develop guys cheaply around him. That's what the Bucks are going to have to do with Giannis, but that's where the league is headed. And I'm not suggesting you look at this now if you're Giannis and you say, well, you know what? I do like where it's headed here. I think there's a lot of questions to be answered. But why I suggested, hey, is that Jayson Tatum injury more important to the Eastern Conference than the Bucks losing in the first round for a 3rd consecutive year because of what it means for the Celtics? That team's not going to stay the same. That team's not going to look the same next year. I would venture to guess between Derek White, Drew Holiday, Kristaps Porzingis, 2 of those guys are off the team this offseason. 2 of those guys are moved on. Maybe even Jaylen Brown is traded. And then you get into the point of this is a gap year. Let's trade Jaylen Brown. Let's kind of cleanse financially, bring in a young player, bring in some assets, bring in cheaper deals, And then we start to reload and build back up around Jayson Tatum when he returns probably, 2 years from now in that 26-27 season. Taking the Celtics off the board, if that's the case, and putting them maybe at the same level of the Bucks, if these are two teams that are saying, maybe we're a playing team, maybe we're the 6 seed, maybe we're the 5 seed, makes it very interesting in the Eastern Conference where it's potentially wide open once again. And that's the thing with the Bucks is if Giannis sees that, and I do think he's not an idiot, obviously, and sees if I want to go somewhere, even if this Victor Wembanyama guy is intriguing and I decide I can't win here, I am better served to be in the Eastern Conference because Celtics may have to gut the team now. Cavaliers, who knows what happens there? I don't think it's as simple as it was injuries that Cleveland had. It was one game that they had all those guys out. The Indiana Pacers thoroughly beat them. And this is, by and large, the same group that has now come up short in the playoffs annually. The Magic are a young, talented team still struggling to find some offense. Who knows what happens there? The Knicks are going to start to come into that same spot eventually when we talk about those cap constraints. Now, they're benefited by the fact that somehow Jalen Brunson took a very, very team-friendly deal when he re-signed with that group. But the point we were making before, that bill starts to come due. Karl Anthony Towns, over $50 million next year. OG Anunoby, close to $40 million. Jalen Brunson, even with that team discount, $35 million. Mikal Bridges is going to start to go up. So they're going to eventually get to that spot too, where you got tough decisions to make. I think it's going to be an ever-changing conference. And what we've seen with 7 years now, 7 different NBA champions, I don't think we're stopping at 7. And that's what leaves the door open for, look, even if we call it a gap year, whatever it is, just keep the young guys intact, continue to develop pieces, keep Giannis around. And that's why I will die in the hill. The Bucks are in a much better spot. Even if they can't win a championship next season, you are in a much better spot to keep Giannis around and start to slowly but surely reload around him, then to move on from that, because we quite frankly saw what it was like prior to Giannis. And I know it's a different NBA now, but you just never know how long it takes you to get back to that spot. If you have Giannis, you can talk yourself into being in that spot. But I do wonder if that Celtics injury, that has more everlasting change around this conference than everybody assuming Giannis is going to be gone because the Bucks lost in the first round for a third consecutive season. This story isn't going to go away, as we said. There is a meeting between Giannis and the front office this week to go over offseason plans, everything else. As I said before, I don't think I would anticipate any type of decision or reporting to come out of Giannis who said he's going to stay or Giannis would ask for a trade. I don't think that's coming this week. I don't think that's coming until after the NBA Finals, but it's going to be anxiety-inducing for a lot of Bucks fans. Leave your thoughts in the comments. Trades that are out there. We just mentioned one that was suggested to us by a fan. Anything else? The Celtics moves that we talked about, but what's the impact that Jayson Tatum injury has on the Eastern Conference? Is it more impactful? I mean, we said the Bucks losing in the first round 3 years in a row, but really the Dame injury, comparing 2 Achilles injuries, man, that Dame one, we said, well, the Bucks are dead in the water. Are the Celtics actually worse because of that now? Because this expedites, hey, you got to break up this team. Really quickly as we wrap here, and Camille, we think he'll be back tomorrow, a little bit under the weather today. I caught the Netflix Untold episode on the Washington Wizards, and specifically on Gilbert Arenas and Javaris Crittenden. Everybody, I'm sure, is familiar with that story there in the firearms in the Wizards locker room years ago. And it was the second or third NBA specific edition of that Untold series. And it just got me to thinking, what's the Bucks story out there that makes the most sense to be featured in one of these docu-series pieces by Untold? And I really came down to 3 different stories. So leave your thoughts in the comments between these 3. If there's something else that comes to mind of what's the one that makes the most sense? Is the story to be shared and told in that documentary series format? The 3 that I came down to, and 2 of them are very much tied together. But number 1, the Kareem Abdul-Jabbar trade. Is Chris in the comments, just as I'm about to say it, brings it up as well. We're aligned there. The Kareem Abdul-Jabbar trade, and now with the benefit of hindsight, going back, revisiting People that were involved in the trade, Kareem himself, if you could get him and more of, look, here's why I wanted out of Milwaukee, and here's why I asked for that trade. Here's where I was at that point in my career, personally and professionally. The Bucks side of it, here's what we were looking for. Here's how tough it was for us to grapple with, and here's when we knew. Here's the chain of events that led up to all of it. We haven't gotten much of that. So revisiting that Kareem Abdul-Jabbar trade, I think, would be certainly a fascinating one. And, the two that I said are tied together, one, I'm sure a lot of people are going to suggest, and that is the Ray Allen trade, which in hindsight, one of the worst trades, is certainly in Bucks franchise history, one of the worst trades we've seen in the past 3 decades in NBA history. When you trade Ray Allen, who's just coming into his prime like that, and Flip Murray, you get back Gary Payton and Desmond Mason. Gary Payton leaves months later in free agency to go to the Lakers. But to me, the one that I would go with, and I saw somebody just brought up one of these, close, the Fourth Empire, you say the 2001 Eastern Conference Finals. I would not go with that. The one to me that is the most juicy story to be told is the 2002 Milwaukee Bucks. Because that is a team that entered the season having lost in the Eastern Conference Finals. Depends on what side you come down on and whether or not it was the Bucks that lost to the Sixers or it was the Bucks that lost to the officials. But there's a lot of optimism surrounding that team, and you still had your big three. A lot of reasons to be excited. This team is still going to be there. This team's going to be one of the perennial powerhouses in the Eastern Conference. And as we saw, it was the beginning of the end in 2001. You trade for Anthony Mason, the late Anthony Mason, and it just never worked. I still remember very vividly watching that first game Mace played in a Bucks uniform against the Utah Jazz, one of the few that were televised on Channel 18, and seeing the size of Anthony Mason and thinking, holy cow, this is not the Anthony Mason I remember. It did not work out. There were certainly some growing pains there. You traded a big piece of your locker room in Scott Williams, and that was ultimately the beginning of the end for everyone involved. That trade doesn't work out. You started the season well. You eventually fall completely apart. You go into the season, final game of the season in Detroit in a win, and you're in as the 8th seed situation for a team that was just in the Eastern Conference Finals, and you get blown out, run off the floor by the Pistons, miss the playoffs. You end up trading Ray Allen. You would trade Glenn Robinson for Tony Kukoc. George Karl would get fired. It was just an unraveling that happened ever so quickly. So to me, everything about that trade for Anthony Mason, the infighting that was going on, how quickly things were starting to deteriorate and fall apart for that Bucks team, to me, the 2002 Bucks. That's the story I want to see told on Untold. So leave your thoughts on what's the story out there you would like to hear the most about for the Bucks in Bucks history. And 80s Bucks are brought up quite a bit. If we're being honest, I mean, there's a lot of positives other than you come up short, right? You were unfortunately in the same conference as the Celtics and the 76ers, but we're looking for the really juicy, salacious stuff for this documentary. So leave your thought on what's the best untold story that's out there for the Milwaukee Bucks. That'll do it for today's show, though. So leave your thoughts on the untold story to be told and any trade suggestions that you have. How can the Bucks improve this roster? But most importantly, is that Jayson Tatum trade more impactful to the conference than anything, save for Giannis being traded, that's going to happen with the Bucks this offseason? And we'll start to get into those thoughts coming up on the next couple of shows here. That'll do it for today. Thanks to everybody for tuning in, and shouts to Camille, who's hopefully holding it together under the weather today. Justin, we'll talk with you once again tomorrow on Locked On Bucks.